It's not too
Yeah.
bad though.
It's not too bad, but there's a little bit there.
Yeah.
Right, this is
I
looking
like
promising.
that. It's gonna have a nice balance with the two, kind of the brown and the blue playing together.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm looking forward to getting into it. I'm gonna draw a thread for the first time on it.
Oh,
Fancy,
you may
right?
get you may get addicted
Yeah.
because every time I see that super crisp edge, I'm like, it's so annoying when you do it, but then you cut it out and you see these like perfect rectangles laying there. You're like,
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to the doing. I'm looking forward to the have done. But it's many things in life.
I may have taken way too many pictures of just the like cut out perfect edges, just like, look at them, they're beautiful.
My babies.
My children.
Okay, is everyone ready to go back to being properly live?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm just going to put a message in the Discord. It's gonna come up as a new video, like I've had to drop the old stream and it'll be a new stream. So I will get a link for that ASAP, but I have to set it to public and do that. So once I hit save, I'm assuming we're going to be like live. So yes, so anyway. All right, this wasn't as bad as it could have been. We have a fix. All is well. All right, save. Let's do this. I hope this is going to work.
We'll press our thumbs.
Working? I don't know. YouTube doesn't like me.
I see it live.
Okay, can you see our faces and stuff?
Yep. I don't have audio turned on at the moment, but I do see it. It's like, yep.
All right, I'm going to have to very quickly navigate my way back into settings. But I should be able to find that relatively easily. Thank you, Zoom, for actually cooperating. Hello, we return.
Fashionably late.
Yes. All right, fantastic. It seems like people can hear everyone now. So we've had to change to streaming directly from Zoom. So what is happening is there will be a link to a Google Doc in the description where our wonderful captioner is tip-tapping away to try and keep up with things. So if you need captions, open up that document and have it on the side of the screen. So I think that's everything. I'm just going to quickly update Discord and let everyone know. Thank you so much for your patience. I believe that is everything. Is everyone all good on my end? Panelists, is everyone good?
Good.
I got a thumbs up from the captioner as well. Excellent. Okay, so picking up where we left off, I believe we were up to introducing Henric. Was that where we were?
Right. Yep, that was it. That was me.
Wonderful. All right.
Did people hear the previous introductions though? Sorry.
Oh, no, that's very true.
I wouldn't mind going back from the top.
Yeah, let's go from the top again. So starting with B.
Hi, I'm B. My Instagram is Dorian Gay, and I use they, them pronouns. I've been sewing since I was about 7. My grandma taught me how to sew, and I've been wearing vintage fashion for a while, and I've been getting into historical costuming and original practice hand sewing. And I'm currently working on a Lady Dorian Gray full costume, doing a corset and everything.
Beautiful. Oh, and nope, we're good. I misread a comment and thought they still couldn't hear you, but we're good. So next up was Claire.
Hello, everyone. I'm Claire. I also go by Embry, and my pronouns are they and them. You can find me on Instagram at @CClaireDraw, and that's SEE Claire Draw. And I'm also over on YouTube at Be Queer and Make Stuff, or Be Queer Make Stuff. I am relatively recent into the sewing world. I really haven't been sewing for very long at all, but I am really happy to be here, and I'm making sort of an amalgam of eras. Basically, I'm making whatever my heart desires. I am having top surgery in 9 days, and so I'm looking forward to making waistcoats and all sorts of things with my new chest dimensions.
Wonderful. All right, now Henric.
Hi, so I'm Henric. I use they, them pronouns, and I go by @MedievalTailor on Instagram. As the name might suggest, I do medieval clothing, mostly men's clothing of the late 15th century. I use Henric online because that is the name that is associated with me in the Society of Creative Anachronism, which is essentially a sort of historical LARP sort of group that does mostly medieval LARP stuff. So yeah.
Excellent. And that brings us to Lee.
Hello, my name is Lee. I go by @DressingPrinceLee on Instagram, because puns. And I go by they, them. I mostly focus on a wide variety of historical costumes, but eventually I'd love to do historical versions of existing properties. And I'm also really into researching people who express their gender and the way that they dress historically that don't correspond to their assigned gender. Currently, I'm researching into the Molly houses, which they're mostly more of a gay bent, but there's a couple that exist in there, particularly one called CoCoVid Duchess, who outside of the Molly houses dresses in feminine clothing and goes completely by those pronouns and in that name. So I'm digging deep into this in research and hopefully gonna bring it out to other areas.
Beautiful. Also, people are in chat asking what your cat's name is.
Lady Stardust. She's lives up to her name, I think.
Excellent. And yes, this video now does qualify for the Pets of CosTube badge if you are looking for that. So, cat. Awesome. All right, Rosen, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Rosencrantz Thunderbraid, and I've been sewing since, well, my mother made all of my clothing growing up, so I've kind of just lived around it my whole life. As far as doing it socially, I guess, like on Facebook and Instagram, that's newer, and I'm super nervous about it because I'm terrible about finishing anything in a timely manner, but really, I think possibly it'll be a lot better if I actually have people asking, hey, what's the progress of the thing? I think that would help a lot. My Instagram is SpaceMonkey414. I am currently deciding whether or not to change my tag that I've been using on Facebook and YouTube. So those are, I don't know what that's going to be quite yet.
Fair enough. All right. And that brings us to Sleight.
Hi, I'm Sleights of Hand. I go by he, him pronouns. I actually came out over 10 years ago, but I only transitioned, got my surgery and everything else 2 years ago. But the federal government finally recognized me as male this year, so I'm happy with that, especially in this administration. I'm a jack of all trades. I grew up around sewing, but I didn't really have a chance to really sew a lot of things myself and be costuming, mostly due to not having a lot of money or time and a lot of resources. So I've only been like competition and like really high level sewing for the last maybe 3 to 4 years. I'm a cosplayer, although I was also in the Society for Creative Anachronism in college. I was one of those dolts making chainmail. So I love doing a lot of armor making. I do a lot of foam smithing. I am also working on some actual leather, real leather armor, chainmail as well. Like I love learning everything and everything. So I do a lot of sewing. I made this as a costume entry last year. And I do a lot of resin casting, 3D printing, like you name it. I'm a cosplayer. I go all across the board. But yeah, you name it, I like making it.
Awesome. We've got a lot of congratulations in chat, both for Claire with your top surgery and Sleight with officially being recognized as your gender. Very good stuff. All right, so we're going to jump straight into our questions that we have prepared. So yes, let's get started. So first of all, I'm reading off of a list here, so I'm not like looking at the void down here. I have my iPad with a list on it. All right. Mainstream history narratives ignore queer and trans people, and unfortunately, modern history discussions and communities continue to push trans and non-binary people out of these spaces. What are some ways that you feel that cis people can improve these spaces to make them more inclusive? Who wants to go first? Claire?
I can start us off a little bit here. I think, and this leads into another question too, on the list that we'll get into more later, but I think some of the easiest ways is just going to be basically how people use language. Specifically, I'm thinking a lot about using, male dress or female dress, men's wear, women's wear, that sort of thing. You can describe something as being feminine or masculine without describing the person who should be in it. And I think that that's an easy way for, communities to sort of start to decouple those two ideas.
Anyone else got something to add? Yep, B.
I just feel like cis people try and not too afraid to stand up for trans people. So often in spaces, especially in person, I'm afraid to stand up for myself in case it's not safe, there's negative reaction. Usually it's a little safer for cis people to do. So if you go to a convention or anything with a trans friend or without, and you're just an ally, try and stand up when you hear people being transphobic, using heavily gendered language where it's unnecessary. Cis people often listen to other cis people more often than listening to trans people.
Rosen, I saw you had a point to make.
So I had two teachers in I was going for a fashion degree program, and one of them, it wasn't very supportive, but the other one was. And the way that she did that was she didn't, when she gave us a project, she would say, here's an image of a fan, make it into a line of clothing. And when I asked, does it, like, what gender does it have to be? What are we looking for? She said, whatever you want to do. And she actively not only didn't try to exclude by using, she was very proactive about making sure that I felt supported. And she does this with all of our students, regardless of what their condition is or whatever they are in their story. She was just so supportive, and the way that she did that was by just not using that language until you used it first. So, and she's cisgendered and old. I didn't expect that at all. It made such a difference just to not use any of that until the person you're talking to says it, until I say, I want to make a feminine dress. Then we can talk about it being feminine or masculine dress for, yeah.
Sleight, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to segue that into sort of discussing fashion and sewing in general and vintage inspired fashion. And this is something that actually is being at least discussed in back rooms in certain like big fashion brands. I actually have an associate who is a director for a fashion company, and it's something they've discussed, and I thought it was so exciting to hear they're discussing it, even if they're not pushing it forward yet. And that's breaking that menswear and women's wear division that we have right now, and instead selling clothes and like marketing clothes as for certain body types. If you are a Dorito, you want to buy these clothes, these will flatter you. If you are more hourglass shape, these are the clothes that would flatter you. You could filter that by, do you want slacks? Do you want skirts? And at no point would it be like, this is for women and this is for men. And the industry isn't really going there yet because that's like they're afraid to. Look around in America, you can understand why they're afraid. But I think that's where we really have an ability to start to really push that and start talking about like, well, when I'm designing something, I'm designing it for a body type, to flatter that body type, not for a menswear or women's wear. And I think that's really exciting. And I'd like to see like more like even small boutique fashion brands to talk about like, well, I'm designing these for these bodies.
Beautiful. Claire, you raised your hand.
I even raised it in a Zoom call, like a
Fancy.
tech chat. I just kind of wanted to bring it back to like what Cis people can do specifically in our own communities here. Like fashion houses are awesome, but I don't know how many, how many people within like CoCoVid, for example, are fashion house people. They might be, and if that is true, that's rad. But I think something that's becoming more normative, and I'm really glad for it, is people just asking what pronouns are. Like say, hey, nice to meet you. What are your pronouns? Like, do that. That's great. Then it doesn't have to be an awkward thing. You save awkwardness for everyone.
Lee.
Lee.
Just me slowly raising hands. So I think one of the biggest things that we can do is, so often in many marginalized communities, there's almost a separation where people will go, oh, well, this is like queer history or Black history or something like that. And we become sort of an exception as opposed to part of everyday life. So one of the biggest things you can really start doing is, hey, if you do historical costuming, there's actually plenty of extant examples that involve queer people, and rolling those in, or having us as a casual example as opposed to I specifically went out of my way to choose this type of person. It's so much like I get the warm fuzzies whenever I just see one like casually slid in. Like I saw somebody with them referencing historical dress. I saw a painting of what they would term at the time a male crossdresser, but fully in the entire getup, and I'm like, there, hey, look at that. And it made me feel much less separate, because so often we become separate as a defense mechanism to kind of make sure that they're safe places for us. But it's better that we extend those safe places into everyday life than it is to become these kind of tiny contained communities.
Henric, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just very briefly building off what Claire and Lee have already said is it is thankfully becoming more common, but it would be great if it is kind of extended even more, is people including their pronouns in their social media, because it normalizes it so that it's not just trans people who are sharing their pronouns, but it makes it a part of kind of everyday life and everyday interactions, of making sure that you are confirming and checking with people's pronouns and not making it, because sometimes it can become a sort of a microaggression if you have someone who is androgynous or who is not presenting as what you would assume to be their assigned gender at birth. You can be like, oh, just let me check, what are your pronouns? And that can become a sort of instinctive, like, you're not looking as how I would expect you to look, or you are not presenting as the gender I would assume you to have. So just making that a part of every life, is no matter who anyone is, just asking what do they look like, is checking pronouns and making it a part of sharing your pronouns so that people know that they are in a safe space enough that they can share their pronouns with you in a place where they won't be belittled or degraded for that.
Beautiful. All right, so we could obviously talk on this topic for the rest of the panel, but I'm gonna shuffle us along onto a similar topic that we have started to touch on. So many costuming and historical communities use very heavily gendered language with blatant disregard to diverse modern communities. Someone provided an example of being in a Facebook group called Vintage Makeup for Modern Ladies, where it could have easily said something along the lines of for modern makeup lovers. Are there any more examples people have of this occurring? B went first.
I feel like a lot of the time I see people who will use genderless language when talking about people now, but still revert back to talking with like gendered language if we're talking historically. And we need to remember that we're still talking to modern people, and that being queer and being trans isn't new. And so I see things often in historic communities talking about what women did during menstruation. Can we remember that not everyone then who menstruated was a woman? Not every woman who can menstruate. That's relevant now, that was relevant then, and you still need to be including modern people in your discussions of history, especially since we're historical costumers. You're talking about clothes that we're going to be putting on our bodies now, even if you're talking historically. So like, I'm not a woman, but I need to worry about that, but you're still gendering that language, and it makes me not want to be part of the discussion.
Anyone else have things to add? Henric?
Hi, yeah, very briefly is more of a positive example than something I've seen that's negative is, I don't know if any of you are aware of the Modern Maker, who is I believe an American focusing on 16th and 17th century clothing mostly. His name is Matthew Nyagi, I think. Forgive me if my pronunciation is off on that, but he has recently re-released all of his publications, so that instead of saying things like men's clothing and men's wear, he's reframed it to be clothing for bodies in that kind of sense. So it's the repositioning of that for, because obviously hormones have a huge amount to do with the way that your body is shaped, especially if you have had a body that's dominated by that hormone for a long time. So it's that sort of recognition that there are people who are assigned female at birth who are on, I've forgotten the name for now, on HRT, I've forgotten the full name for it. And that, you know, their body may not be the same as either that of someone who is assigned male at birth and has a testosterone dominant body, or someone who is assigned female at birth and has a estrogen dominated body. So yeah, I think that's a really great thing of switching it around, to keep the focus on the right place rather than of what you were assigned at birth or what genitals you have or anything like that, because that's not ultimately relevant to body shape, which is something that we were talking about earlier.
Anyone else? Claire? Unmute yourself.
Something in the costuming community that I have not personally taken part in any way is, but I know that there are like balls, like Regency balls, where people, you know, in non-COVID times, where people, you know, gather up and have fun, exciting parties. And it is something that was mentioned to me when I was posting about some non-binary stuff, that other people have felt excluded by that, specifically when the invitations include, you know, come dressed in formal menswear or come dressed in formal, you know, women's wear. And obviously nobody means to be exclusive, but it's one of those things that can be, so be aware.
Yeah. Lee, I saw you putting your hands up a couple of times.
No. So this is one of those issues that is very sticky, right? There's a historical context to dress that does not exist today. And so talking about it really takes, like, you should just take a moment to lay down the context you're talking about at the time. And I think a lot of people, they just do the shorthand in their head, but if they go through, it's like, oh, if you're talking about quote unquote women's dress, it's like, well, at the time this would be considered women's dress, because you can even see in a number of historical documents, which of course the brain has let go of the name right now. But there's one in the 1600s that is opining the female cross-dresser, where it's a woman cross-dressing as a man, as they would say in that time. And really all this person is doing is putting on a doublet and a male hat, and they're like, or in a sword, and they're like, look at this person dressing like a man. They're the same with the men. There's actually a callback at one where they call out the same issues in men's dress, and that's what they call it at the time. And it's hard to kind of decouple in that sense, where we don't then put our modern lens over it, where we're like, okay, well, this is what they called it at the time, but we wouldn't call it now because of the way that we view dress and gender. It's not interlocked in the same way that it used to be. Even though we'll still use antiquated things, most of the time a woman or a AFAB wearing a pair of pants would not be immediately like, ooh, we still have some hang-ups, of course, when it comes to masculine people wearing feminine dress, but it's one of those things where if we take the moment and just put our modern lens on top of it, so that we're making sure to include people of today while preserving the historical context, it helps so much. Like, just that one extra little thought really goes a long way in feeling included.
Beautiful. We're going to continue moving on. Once I find where we were up to. All right, so let's talk genderqueer fashion and costuming. How are some ways you kind of queer the historical while keeping certain aspects of the style or era clear? Whether you've actually done this or plan to do it. Feel free to chat about it. Claire, I saw your face just light up, so you go first.
This is basically like hashtag goals. Like, this is all I want to do is just like make really cool shit, but just like, I swore, I'm sorry. Cool stuff, and just like make it as gay as possible, basically. And I say that in the shorthand way of saying gay. It's not, specifically gay, but in terms of making it work while still like maintaining some sort of air of anything historical about it is kind of a challenge that I'm still sort of figuring out. I am really drawn to particular like Victorian and Edwardian women's wear styles, where I want to make them for a male body without a corset. And it's like, well, how do you do that while still sort of keeping some sort of integrity to the design? And I'm having a lot of fun playing with it, but I haven't really figured it out yet. If anyone has suggestions, let me know.
Any thoughts from the group? B?
I want to say, obviously, I like queer historical fashion because of like, obviously this isn't accurate and stuff. But I do want to point out that we queer historical and vintage fashion just by wearing it. Even if we wore something that was completely accurate, if you completely made something from a painting, nothing was changed, you've queered it just by being a queer person wearing it. And I think that's something to keep in mind, that you don't, like, it's fun to change things, obviously, but it is also just queering it by existing in these clothes.
Rosen, did you have something to say?
I worked on a line last year it was one of my final projects for a class, and I played with Disney princesses, but I wanted them in the style of Daenerys. And the one that I ended up wearing was Gamora, and she's a very strong character. So I really wanted to make sure that it was like that. And if I were to remake this, I feel like it's just as wearable as no matter what gender you wanted to be. I would remake it a little bit, so maybe there's not as much bust in it, but it came down to the fabric that I chose. I chose different fabrics to try to stiffen it so that it wasn't that feminine shape, so that it really conveyed what I wanted to convey, which was strength of character, not a pretty princess. And I know Gamora isn't an official Disney princess, but she's a Marvel princess, and therefore Marvel is Disney and is a Disney princess.
Okay.
Lee, you had your hand up.
It's all of these are such complicated answers, right? Because the gender spectrum is so diverse, and to one person, their expression could be completely binary, and to another person they could just be way somewhere else. But I feel like a lot of this could really benefit from us examining how we feel about ourselves, and just like actually bringing into these historical costumes the context of what we find more bent towards our expression than others. Sometimes when people talk about authenticity, if you change any of the arrangement, even if it's could be done at the time, like completely in the practice, it suddenly becomes inauthentic, even though you could have a person at the time do this. So a lot of this kind of comes from an acceptance of other people just being like, it's okay to alter these things from the perspective of, well, I don't fit neatly into one of these boxes that is a little more binary for the time. And allowing that kind of fluidity and exploration in the spaces that you wear them out. Like going to balls or things like that. A lot of people will be very strict, like Claire said, and it starts with other people just being open to a different form of authenticity.
Say something?
Yes, go ahead.
I notice with the way I dress when I'm around straight and cis people, they think I'm presenting as a woman, and that like because I'm feminine, I'm automatically a woman. But I notice that when I'm in queer spaces, I'm recognized as like high femme. And because I am so feminine and like I push the boundary of what's like straight and feminine, queer people always recognize that I'm queer without a problem ever. But outside of queer spaces, I'm just seen as a woman. I think it's interesting that we can recognize that in each other, very specific types of femininity, androgyny, masculinity, whatever it may be, that we can tell what's a little bit different.
I'm going to very briefly pop in for a tiny point, because that's a really interesting thing that can transition into cis people's experiences, because as a cis woman, you know, I don't have a lot to say in this panel, but as a bisexual being in queer spaces, you know, it is something that we all kind of have that sort of, I don't know, subconscious acceptance where it's like, you know, you can feel that expression. And I think part of it is something that you can train yourself to do. So I believe that cis people can start looking not at gender, but at expression, or at kind of, I want to say vibe without like setting off all the vibe checks, you know? But yes, that's my tiny point. Was there anything else people wanted to say on the topic? Shall we continue on? Yep. All right. So Lee briefly mentioned this in their little introduction, but while terms like non-binary and trans are new, the ideas aren't. So what are some examples that people have of queer, trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming people from history? I'm gonna let Lee start because this is your kind of special interest.
They're far more present than people think, but I think it's because we'll often reduce the diversity of experience, or say this is just this subculture, and almost dismiss it when people talk about history. Like earlier I was talking about the Molly houses and how they're kind of like the Stuart version of the the gay club scene, but within that, much like in say like we can compare it to Stonewall Inn, where you had this hidden gay club scene, but within that gay club scene you had people actually, a lot of trans women, a lot of people who didn't quite fit within what a lot of the mainstream history would lay over it. And so it's this thing that you have to go into and kind of decouple from how mainstream history sees it. You have to bring it back into its context of the day and bring it back into how the society at large would see these people. It's really hard to kind of assign something to someone back then because they have different language than we do, and they don't view gender and sexuality in quite the same way that we do. So it's kind of difficult to say, oh, that person's gay or that person's trans, because they may not themselves, if they had the language, identify that way because of the culture they existed in. What we can do is go back and look at these people who didn't quite fit in to these stereotypical roles for them, or the stereotypical way that they would have dressed according to their assigned gender, and examine it from why they are using that way of dress or that kind of interaction with the world as an expression of themselves. There's a number of what I could only call female swashbucklers who completely dressed in men's clothing, of course at the time, and wore swords and literally actually fought and went to war. But it's hard to tell for them, are these trans men or women who just wished to be outside of their gender role, or a lot of them actually become, and this is great, you should really look this up, female husbands. That is literally the term of the time, and it's absolutely fascinating. You see women dressing as, or what they would be, AFABs at the time, dressing in masculine dress, and literally marrying AFABs at the time that would be considered in the female role. I'm reading an absolutely wonderful book called Claire and Sylvia. I'm really sorry, I cannot remember the name of the author at this moment.
That's all right. We'll gather all of the resources afterwards and add it to the description.
It is about an early American, the actual line of it is a same-sex marriage. It is two AFAB, who one takes on a masculine role but not masculine dress, and is often refers to as if the husband, and they're constantly referred to as if they're married, and they call her the female husband. And so it's one of those things that if you just kind of look out, you can really find this wealth of information. And it's often hidden right under your nose. It's just, you have to look at it from a more open point of view, in that these people aren't expressing the societal role of themselves. Why is that? Is it possibly that they are a member of the queer community, or is it you explore them from multiple angles and really dig into what their stories mean, as opposed to just defaulting to, oh, this was I'll often see a number of these female husbands just defaulted into, it was a woman who just didn't want to be in a feminine role. And it's it's not necessarily what that is. Just go into these things with this kind of open mind and understand that the straight cis experience is not the same experience as everybody in a historical context.
Claire, you've got your
talk.
That's all good. You've got your virtual hand raised.
Yeah, I wanted to add another story because that's great. I'm gonna look that book up too. But I was following an Instagram, I think it's called Gilded Victorians, and that Instagram feed posted a link to a photographer, I think from the 1900 area, around the turn of the century, Marie Hogg, and I believe she was Dutch, so I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. But there's this collection of photographs that she took, and I'm using she because I don't know any other truth for her, where she and her partner were presumed lesbians, basically, and photographers, both of them. And there's this secret collection of photos that came out of a barn like 30 or 40 years ago or something. And in that collection, they found all of these photos of them basically playing with gender. There was presumably, well, I'm just gonna, yeah, a male friend with a mustache in complete, corseted, garb, and looked amazing. And several of Marie Hogg in menswear, and with a pipe and a dog, and in a fake boat in their like photography studio. And they're just really delightful, and I really encourage people to look them up because they look so happy. Like, they just look so charmed in all of those photos.
Awesome. Henric, you just put your hand up.
Hi, yes, I did. I wanted to give some other specific names in addition to the one that Claire and Lee have already mentioned. So one that some people watching may already be familiar with is Anne Lister, who is a relatively famous lesbian or an AFAB person who played with gender roles. The BBC recently did a 6-part series on her called Gentleman Jack, which I would highly recommend watching. It is really good. And Jessica Kellgren-Fozard also did a very brief video about her and her life in general, which I think is really worth watching if you haven't already. Essentially, she was she sort of considered herself a lesbian in her diaries, and that is sort of what we can presume from that. But she also she played a lot with her gender presentation, and she was known as Gentleman Jack and all that sort of thing. But I also wanted to go a little bit further back, just because I have some relevant medieval examples, which I think are really exciting, because I always really like to hear about trans people who are centuries and centuries ago, because I always find that quite validating. So I wanted to thank very briefly Kevin Rakestraw and Nathaniel Bradley, who are part of the SCA, who did a talk on this, and I'm pulling their notes from that talk that I found really interesting and really, really valuable. So I just want to mention a couple of names very briefly, which was, so the first story I have is the one of St. Marinos, who was a person who was assigned female at birth, who joined a monastery with his father, presuming, like, essentially assuming the role of a monk, and he was a famous ascetic, and there's a whole story about how he was accused of making a local woman pregnant, which of course physiologically he would not have been able to do, but he didn't protest that. Passed out of the monastery because of that, and essentially once he died, they found out as part of the burial ceremony that he was assigned female at birth and therefore could not possibly have fathered this child that he was accused of fathering, that he was cast out of the monastery for. And so was, I don't think that was wanted. I think it was a part of that sort of miracle thing, which I always find really cool, especially theories about how his asceticism could have played into his gender in terms of not wanting to eat a lot, in terms of wanting to restrict diet to either reduce body fat or potentially kind of reduce the likelihood of menstruation, which is really interesting to think about. Especially, it was, I can't remember what exact year it was, but it was, I want to say 12th or 13th century, but that is a very wild guess, and I apologize if that is wrong. And of two trans feminine examples that I have very briefly. So there is a Jewish poet slash philosopher called Kalonymus Ben Kalonymus, who wrote a poem that was essentially bemoaning the fact that he wasn't assigned female at birth, which I would highly recommend reading if you get the chance, because that is really cool. And there is also a case that Lee in particular might be interested in, just the case of Eleanor Reichner. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Reichner is Rykener, and it is one of many cases of female sex workers, and this sex worker was found out to be assigned male at birth. But throughout the trial, really interestingly, they still use she/her pronouns for her, because obviously they have the court records, but they continue using she/her pronouns for Eleanor throughout the entire trial, despite the fact that there is this they can't accuse her of sodomy because they are treating her as a female sex worker, but they can't really accuse her of quote unquote prostitution because she is assigned male at birth. And I can't remember the eventual outcome, but there's this really interesting tension and interplay between sex and gender that happens throughout the entire case and throughout the court records. That is really worth reading.
I love when there's documentation like that. It makes me so happy. Where it's like, proof,
that's beautiful.
Proof they could do it then.
Love that.
And bringing that back to costuming very briefly, is that she appeared in court in still like all female dress, because that is what she preferred to wear.
Oh, that's great. I'll definitely be digging into that.
Even if they didn't have that.
Oh, we muted you. Oh, you're back. All good. Okay. So a couple of people in the chat have been saying, you know, what was that name? What was this name? We will gather all of the resources after the stream, and I will put a resource list in the description so that you can grab all of that information. And I'll let my panelists add extra bits to it so we can continue the conversation, but if you have more examples, we'll add them into the list for people to have a look at after the stream. I also saw some names fly by in chat for a couple of examples that people in chat had. So that's awesome. So good to see. We're going to move on to kind of a big talking point that's come up in the community a lot. We're going to talk about the term vintage style, not vintage values. So what does this term mean to you? Who wants to go first? We haven't heard from Sleight much. Did you have something to add to this?
Put me on the spot, why don't you? I have to take it back to a lot of how I was raised and why this is considered like not my everyday wear, but I want to see vintage inspiration in a lot more of modern culture. And there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. Like, I was raised on very gentleman values. There's a lot of baggage that comes with that you don't want to take necessarily. Vintage style to me means taking and honoring some of the best things. Like, there are reasons I love this. It's elegant, it's refined. I think it speaks of a morality, of human kindness that we can take and then bring into the modern era and make, especially talking about queering it, using that as a lot of our aesthetic. And that's reinterpreting it for us while still adhering to the styles that we love so much.
Excellent. Henric, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, B. Yeah, I do. I just wanted to add the very brief and obvious point that we are all white presenting people. I don't know if all of us are like actually white, but vintage style, not vintage values was a term coined by, I think, Dandy Wellington, who is a black man in the cosplay community, and it doesn't specifically refer to, but originated in talking about, I think it was specifically Regency clothing, I think, in that sort of era of how you can wear Regency era clothing without espousing the values of a quote unquote slave owner and that sort of thing. So I don't want to take away from that the grounding of that phrase, and obviously that is very important, but I think it does have a wider application in that similarly we can dress if we would like to in a very binary sense, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are the binary gender or are presenting as, let's say, the gender we are assigned at birth if we are dressing in that fashion, or vice versa. So that's what I wanted to say about that.
Very good point. B, you were wanting to jump in?
I just think as modern day people, I'm probably not the only one, but a lot of the reason that I tend to wear vintage or handmade clothing is to be anti-capitalist and to be sustainable. Re-wearing clothes that were made 50 plus years ago, they're still so well made, they're still lasting, and trading clothes, buying secondhand, making your own is inherently anti-capitalist, not playing into that system. Although we know that these clothes were made with the labor of enslaved people originally. And we can wear these clothes in a way to be anti-capitalist and to be sustainable now. We obviously must acknowledge what went into the clothes at the time. But I think that's an example of style, not value. The style is the same, but the reason why we're wearing them is completely different.
Yes, very good. Anyone else have any points to add? Nope. Oh, Lee, jump in.
The hands. A lot of this does kind of go back to that, where there are occasions that if you go and do historical or vintage clothing, assumptions can sometimes be made out of you. Even if it's, say, a cis person, you know, or a white person wearing these, a lot of people will then kind of project how they feel onto them, or how to say this, like have them think that they agree with them or disagree with them simply because of how they dress. And that extends to all dress, really. Dress is another form of communication. But unfortunately, some of these styles or aesthetics can kind of be hijacked by people who don't share the ideas of inclusivity. And so it's something that unfortunately I think we do have to say, just because there are some bad people out there who kind of muddy the waters, and you don't want to have anybody come across this and really love the aesthetics and then feel immediately excluded because so many people with bad intentions are using these aesthetics.
I will just say Trilby and Fedora.
Yeah, it was a dark time in the mid-2000s. But even that, like, growing up where I grew up, there was a huge kind of vintage rebirth community at that time, especially since shows like Mad Men or things like that kind of brought attention to especially vintage clothing. And people would then use it to kind of glorify the ideals of the time. And so I think it's really important that we use these type of messages just to make sure that if a person of color or a queer person comes in, or anybody from like an immigrant background or any sort of marginalized group, if they come into this community because they're like, oh, these dresses or these suits or whatever are so beautiful, I want to wear them too, that they don't feel like immediately, if they join the community, they will be excluded. So I think it's really important to just like continuously express this sort of thing, where it's like, hey, I wear this, but I don't believe in the same sort of things that originally people might have believed when they wore this, you know?
We have to be very aggressively anti-racist, and like if I dress like this, I have to be more clear that I am not believing like the things that someone in the 40s did. We have to be a little bit extra anti-racist and anti-homophobia and whatever it may be, because we present this way. I think it's kind of a responsibility.
That's what I kind of wanted to piggyback onto, is really, we need to wear our values on our chest more. And especially when you see certain groups of people try to claim like a certain style and use it for things that are horrific. We need to be more vocal about what our values are and how we're not associated with that, and how wearing that doesn't mean you're backwards, regressive, and glorifying some really hideous old values that might have originally once been associated with it. And it gives us a great platform for actually putting out good values about love your fellow man. I had another train of thought, but it ran away from me.
I think to continue on that, it's also that not only must we kind of stake our ground, but also make sure that because white straight folks weren't, or white cis straight folks weren't the only people making clothes at the time. They weren't the only designers. They weren't the only. So it's important to kind of recognize that that group of people does not own those clothes as well. You can't kind of magically pave over that other people existed at the time. And not only is it important to kind of, as everybody here has kind of been reiterating, to stake our ground and go, hey, you know, we don't believe that, but also you're part of that legacy too. Like, there are creators that come from all sorts of backgrounds that exist. And if we get the chance to promote that and kind of celebrate that, then other people can really feel like they can own the aesthetic as well.
That's really lovely, Lee.
Oh, thank you.
So on a similar point, intersectionality, it's a major part of modern activism. Can you talk about what intersectionality looks like for you and how we can think about it specifically in the costuming world? And on that point, does anyone want to give a bit of a vague definition for what intersectionality is for people who may not be aware about it? I can do it, but Henric, you've got your hand up if you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it if no one else feels confident doing so. So my understanding of intersectionality is the recognition that people have complex and multi-layered identities. I believe the term was coined by a Black woman who wanted to acknowledge that she was oppressed under the axis of racism, in addition to and in combination with her being a woman. So taking into recognition that there are parallels and combinations of that, of being not just oppressed as a Black person or not just oppressed as a woman, but also as specifically a Black woman. And that broadly applies to other identities as well. So obviously all of us here, well, Eilish as well, you are, I don't know if you use the term queer, but you are under the LGBTQ umbrella. And I don't know how many of the other of us here also have other identities that tie in with that, in terms of other axes of oppression that we may exist under. So for example, I'm disabled, I am a part-time wheelchair user, I'm autistic, got mental health issues up wazoo. But so there's what really interests me about costuming as well is how I can balance my interest in historical accuracy with my gender presentation and also my disability needs as well. So for example, in the specific area that I focus on, what are essentially trousers, the hosen, are sort of skin tight and tied to the doublet, which is the shirt part of the clothing. So that makes it, because they're tied all the way around, including at the back, it makes it very difficult to bend over. And it can also be quite uncomfortable to sit down. So what people would do, if especially laborers, they would untie the points at the back, so they would only be tied to their hosen at the front, leaving it free at the back so they could bend over more freely. So as a wheelchair user, as someone who has to sit down a lot of the time, making accommodations for that, and that sort of thing. So kind of trying to bring into mind that, and also I don't know how many of you are familiar with the idea of grand assiette sleeves. So obviously our modern sleeve lines, this is a modern t-shirt that are my sleeve lines, the hem goes here. For medieval clothing, it's slightly more inset, as in the sleeve head contains the whole of the ball of the shoulders. They're more like this. And Grande Assiette sleeves specifically go even further inwards. So they accommodate, traditionally were meant to accommodate people with larger back muscles and larger shoulder muscles, particularly for things like archery and sword fighting. But in my case, as a wheelchair user, it is really helpful as someone who has to make those sorts of motions a lot just to move around. So that's an accommodation that I like taking into account when I'm making those sorts of things. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Like,
So I was actually on a panel that the Gay Men's Chorus of DC did a couple years back, and it was on the intersectionality of LGBT with geek, specifically cosplay, and which is near and dear to me because, quite frankly, without cosplay, I don't know if I would have figured out I was trans, or at least not figured out I was trans in time before I became too miserable to do something about it. I grew up Midwest, horrible rural area. I'm trying to avoid using F words right now. Like, it was bad. We didn't have language back. I'm old. This was back in the 90s. We didn't have language for transgender back then, especially being a trans man. I'm trying to figure this out. And like, I know I'm different, but I don't know how I'm different. And I went to my first convention and I decided to do a character like this. A male character had a waistcoat. And I kept thinking, oh, there's no way I could pull this off. I should just do a female character. There's no way I could pull it off, but I really like this character. So I bought my first binder and I bound for it. And that, first of all, was just the most like, I feel right like this. But then it was the people, which is why this community is so magnificent to me and why I love it and love doing this. Is I was going around convention and I ran into a trans fellow who's doing Ed Elric, which will be very appropriate if you know the character. And we talked, and he was the first person in my whole life who asked what my pronouns were. And it's like blew my mind. I'm just like I've never been asked this in real life. Like online, I'd had people like presume I was male, and I was really happy with that. Actually, I just let them keep presuming that. And I said, well, I've never thought about it before. Like, I feel really good like this. And when people refer to me online as male, I really like that. And he's like, dude, I got you. And we got on the elevator at the con. And I felt so bad for this poor random guy. This poor random guy in the elevator mams me. And this little Ed Elric rounds on him and starts ripping him a new one, going on, you better respect his pronouns and this, that, and the other thing. And I felt bad for the guy because he didn't know. But I never had someone defend me like that. And that was the combination of, for me, figuring out my trans identity and the cosplay / costuming community that's just like the intersection of these two communities is fantastic. Especially for expression and for really feeling heard and feeling seen. So that was my thing I wanted to share. And just like that forever and a day is like why I love this as much as I do.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. I love that. Lee.
I think, and a lot of times when we talk about intersectionality, we often talk about it from the perspective of like, we have to consider how like how many ways this person is detrimented by each of those identities. But if you look at a lot of queer history, so much of it we actually fully benefit from a lot of, especially POC, usually trans feminine people, and it's something that they themselves actually bring a richness to it, because I think so much if you see the same person over and over again representing one group, they don't realize the depth of experience that can happen, and that you can actually not only benefit like not only benefit in the idea that people are going to do something for you, but benefit in understanding yourself and in getting more empathetic responses to people, where you just take that moment to kind of step back and understand, hey, like, we do share this experience, but they have this entire level of something else that is going on. And if I take the moment to learn about that experience, and I take the moment to kind of listen to someone else who, though they share one aspect of my life, they don't necessarily share another, it can really bring like a deeper understanding to the community as a whole. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of times, so often, especially when I see when I see non-binary folks presented, I'll so often see them, unfortunately, look like myself, you know, mostly leaning towards masculine with some feminine elements. And that's not to say, hey, draw back, you know, that's bad, but it also is, I have many very, very, very feminine AFAB, non-binary people who exist in like a kind of a realm of backgrounds, and they often aren't put forward. And so often the mainstream culture will get the idea, oh, non-binary means this very specific thing. So, and intersectionality really also helps us understand that aspect of it too, where people who are outside of our culture, you know, like, I shouldn't say culture, outside of our experience, can then understand that it is not a narrow experience that is represented by one person, but it actually, anybody could be this. And they start, when they understand that, then I tend to, the people that understand intersectionality, I tend to get the, what are your pronouns? Or the people who actually just offer their pronouns, like, hey, I'm blah, blah, blah. And it's that understanding that there is a diversity within the group that actually allows the whole group to not be seen immediately as kind of, I'm looking at you, you're this thing, you're this type of thing, and immediately get pigeonholed. Because we also get misgendered in that way too, where they'll go, oh, he, and I'm like, I'll give up. I just want to move on with my day, you know. But because people outside of the community, even within the community, get exposed to that, then you get a better experience yourself because of it.
B?
Yeah, going off of that, as an AFAB person who is very feminine, I am rarely recognized as anything but a cis woman. And I spent years in high school dressing incredibly masculine just to get people to maybe think that maybe I wasn't cis. Even though I didn't like it, I didn't feel comfortable dressing masculine, but I made myself do it just to relieve a little discomfort, to maybe have people once in a while think maybe that's not a woman. And it wasn't until I found more vintage clothes and historic clothes that I started to be like, no, I like feminine clothing. I like how it looks on my body. I like the way I can play with it. And in vintage clothing, because it's different, it's not modern masculine clothing, it's feminine, but it's different, it still makes people think. Even though I'm very, very feminine, I am feminine in a different way than people are used to, and it will make people think in a different way than dressing in modern masculine clothes did.
Anyone else? Oh, yeah, jump in, Lee.
Sorry, I
You're
talk
good.
too much.
No.
Not only I think things like that, where you get that experience that you can kind of reassert your identity as they're talking about, but so many, especially historically, people who are non-white, they get the chance to kind of, I shouldn't say that way. They have subcultures where there is more exploration going on, more self-assertion, because of that kind of coming up against the oppression. It's almost like a celebration. Like, originally, I see things of teddy girls. I'm sure some people are familiar with them, but I so often see people putting white faces on that, when the majority of the ones that I first came in contact with were actually people with like Black experience in America, where they had the teddy girl style, you know, very AFAB in a masculine dress sort of expression. And because there are people who play with it more, we get that it can often open us up to it. Like I myself didn't really recognize that I could play further outside until I've seen a lot of these subcultures, especially non-white subcultures, actually dig deeper into the idea of what gender expression is, or how one can dress in a public sphere and be true to themselves. A lot of, at least from my family's experience, the white culture can be very reduced, you know, and kind of more of a single experience. Not necessarily that it's entirely true, but there's a stronger push to be
hegemony is real.
Thank you. So when I got exposed to kind of different subcultures, it was originally through people of a non-white experience, or also, that was an awkward way to say that, I apologize, POC subcultures. That's where I got my main experience, as well as gay subculture, like coming into it going, oh, I don't have to do this. So there's an important component that I think we often don't recognize in that, where a lot of our subculture gets a freedom that does not come from a like a white or straight or cis experience, and we just don't acknowledge that enough, I think, in the way we talk about intersectionality. It's often the like, hey, they suffer this, this, and this, and it's like, yeah, but they bring this, this, and this because of that different experience. And I know I wouldn't be the same without those people, you know.
And I'm glad you're bringing that up too, because I think it's very easy to, as a panel of presumably white people here, to not remember a lot of the things that have been borrowed from other subcultures.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's actually a really great transition point to our last planned topic here. So ending on a big positive note, can you guys talk about some of the things that trans and non-binary perspectives can bring to the community? Claire?
I believe all costumers bring a level of creativity, but when you have to design for a body type that is not inherent in the pattern, that you're required to add a lot more like thinking and creativity and just like expression in the stuff that you make. And I really hope that everyone who makes something will think about that next time they do that. Yeah, trying to design something like a pair of pants that I'm going to be working on soon is designed to, it's women's wear pants, but it's designed to be worn with a corset underneath of it. So I have to like, I'm going to have to do some work here. It sounds like a lot of people have similar experiences. So
yeah, I've seen a fair bit in the chat coming through of people feeling very similar.
Good.
Any other thoughts, Rosen? We haven't heard from you for a bit. Put you on the spot.
I'm actually fighting anxiety right now. So
that's all good. We can come back to you if you want. That's all good. You're all good. B, I saw your hand go up.
I was just thinking that a lot of the time we bring like queer history into spaces that typically wouldn't talk about queer people in history. And it's a way for us to see that we're not alone. People have been like us forever. And I think also learning about queer people, you learn more about what a daily life was like, and you learn more about what real people actually experienced when you read about nearly any queer person in history, way more than you would learn from reading about kings and queens and people that you typically would read about. I think we bring, just by reminding people that we're here and you should read about other trans people dating back hundreds of years, we bring in a whole new light of what you can learn about an average person's life or the way people celebrated differences in the past. because I think we think so often that like differences were only looked down upon in history, but when you really start reading into it, differences have always been celebrated as well.
Lee? Oh, hang on. Henric had their hand up. We'll go Henric and then Lee.
I think Lee was trying to talk before I was, so I'm happy to.
Oh no,
Okay.
no, please. I talk too much. Please go ahead.
All right, we'll go Henric and then Lee.
I just wanted to kind of follow on from something that Claire / Embry said, which was that because trans and non-binary people have to bring a bit more creativity into the way that we design our clothing to fit our bodies and our desired presentation and that sort of thing, is I think it opens up the space to people who aren't even, who could be cis, who might not even be gender non-conforming, to have a more creative and more playful attitude to the kinds of things that they are creating, and to have a space that is very much not binary and that is not defined by strict gender roles and strict gender presentation, that by having that as a solid example, that opens it up for not just people who know they are cis but questioning people, and people who may be cis but are gender non-conforming, and everyone along that kind of spectrum and in all of those encompassing groups. It builds the confidence to have the space and the ability to kind of play with your presentation in a way that I think might not exist otherwise, or might be more difficult to exist.
All right. I think Sleight had something to piggyback off that, so we'll go Sleight and then Lee, you can jump in after that.
No worries. Please go ahead.
Both of you. I think what we really help do is we help break those gender boxes, because Henric, you brought up such a good point. I have had so many cis men talk to me about how, cis straight men who have talked to me about how they want to wear more traditional women's wear garments from time to time, costume or not costume, but it's not safe for them. And they want to do it literally because sometimes it's just more comfortable, or like just part of what they want to try their aesthetic, but it's physically unsafe for them to do so in society. And I think by us, by necessity, having to design these clothes to fit various kinds of bodies, etc., and helping to break down the boxes that are, you know, traditional men's and women's wear, it benefits for cis people who as well. And I don't like using the word cross-dressing. People who do, and that works for their identity, that's fantastic. But a lot of people, if we break the boxes, that's just a note opening up another kind of thing they can wear. And I think that's great.
We also got a good comment from Miss Philomena in the chat that it also opens up to more size inclusivity as well, which is
that's exactly what I was just going to piggyback on here too, which is there are plenty of cis people who don't fit into traditional size boxes either, and so the more that people play around with making things wider in the top and wider in the bottom, it fits more people.
Yeah,
in general.
All right, Lee, jump on in, and then we'll go to Rosen.
So for me, there's something that with people of trans experience, like whether it's non-binary, whether it's binary, we think about our bodies, I think to an extent that other people outside of those experiences might not. That's not to say nobody has body dysmorphia or anything like that, but it's more that we are constantly aware of how our bodies are being seen by others and worrying about, oh, will I fit in their perception of this gender, or will I be able to pass? God, passing is such a thorny subject and so difficult, but passing can often make your life exponentially easier. So one of the things that we can also do is there are people who are cis who do not have traditionally masculine bodies or traditionally feminine bodies. And like say there are plenty of quote unquote pear-shaped men. I've seen them, all like plenty of them, and they do not immediately strike out as a masculine body type, but seeing other people work with the body that they are given to express themselves also opens that up to people who do not necessarily have an ideal body type or a traditionally gendered body type. So like it allows people, I think, in a certain way to see themselves reflected in another person. And in the same way that when trans masculine or trans feminine sees a cis person with their body type makes them kind of feel a little more included and a little more like, oh, okay, I can, you know, there's somebody who is cis and looks like me. I can feel better about myself. We can do the same thing for those who are cisgender, who are maybe feeling bad about their body, not necessarily fitting to what they're expected to be, and be able to go like, you know what, there's this person who looks like me. It's fine, you know.
All right, Rosen, what did you have to say?
Sorry, I have this mad fly that's obsessed with me, so that's what all the flailing is about. I thought I should define the fact that I can't get rid of this fly. I don't know what's up. But to go back to the actual conversation, part of the reason why I've been a little more quiet is I feel like listening to everybody else's stories, I'm a lot earlier on in my progress. I've been thinking trans, or I'm born female, and I've been thinking towards that trans direction for easily over the last 10 years. And I'm just now starting to actually take steps. And it took seeing people. It really did take seeing other people either transitioning or having transitioned for me to feel like this isn't just, oh, it's that niche thing that some people are doing. No, it's something that's worth exploring if you don't feel comfortable in your body. And I don't. In high school, I made jokes with my friends like, hey, you want some cleavage? I have plenty, please take it. I have way too much. And I would try to bind for, like I went to a gay pride parade one time where I really did try to pass as male, and everybody that I asked about it, because I only asked my friends, I'm not gonna ask strangers, they're like, yeah, no, you're just a butch woman. And I'm like, that's when I stopped caring about pronouns. That's when I stopped caring about passing. It's like, if I can't make this happen, I'm not going to try anymore. And that was earlier on in that 10-year period. I'm getting to the point where I still don't care about those things, about me passing or about what pronoun people uses for me. Whatever. But I'm getting over the fact that hurt mentally, the fact that slowed down my progress. And so what I'm doing now is I'm looking like online. I definitely go with he, him a lot of the time. Instagram and Facebook are big exceptions. Facebook, I have family, they don't know any of this. It being masculine online, and now I'm starting to go through actual therapy and start hormones and everything. And I already feel not great in this moment, but I feel so much more comfortable because of that. Even if it's not a pronoun thing and it's not how other people see me, it's how I see me. Oh no. Who did we lose?
Sleight dropped. Oh no. We'll see if we can get him back. We will continue with you, Rosen, but very quickly, Henric unfortunately has to go. It is very, very late for them right now. Thank you so much, Henric, for hanging out.
Just to keep the people around me happy. So thank you so much for hosting, Eilish, and thank you everyone for talking. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm at Medieval Tailor on Instagram, and I would be so happy to talk to literally anyone who's watching. So thank you again, and I'm sorry that I have to leave, and I hope that the rest of the panel goes well. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Bye. All right, I will try and get in contact with Sleight has said that he's disconnected. I'm assuming he's going to try and reconnect. But did you have more to say, Rosen?
I guess if there's anybody else who's really questioning and they want to walk on this journey with me, I'm really going to push on my Instagram, which is the @SpaceMonkey414. Not just documenting my process, but also I know nobody really follows me yet, but I want to be there for people as they're doing the same thing I am. I don't care what direction you're going. I don't care if you're not going all the way. I want to be there for people as I'm also going through all of this. And I'm also trying to figure out, there's a lot of pieces that I feel like I've figured out over 10 years. And there's other pieces that I'm just absolutely terrified for. So I want to go on this journey with other people that that are accepting, I guess. And I've always felt accepted. I've always felt accepted in great spaces like conventions, furry conventions. You want to talk about acceptance? Those people accept almost everyone. It's so warm for more than just the fact that they're in fursuits all day.
Yeah, I think that's a really lovely sentiment, which is that no one is alone right now. If there's someone in the comments who's, wants to talk, I think anybody on this panel would be happy to talk to anybody, whether, you're transitioning or not.
And what you were saying about like experimenting, I always say I think everybody should experiment and play with their gender a little bit. Either you might find out you're trans or you don't, but you might have found out something else about yourself and broken down some gender norms. No matter what the outcome is, I don't think there's anything wrong with experimenting.
Yeah, and also,
I was going to say, experimenting is bad. Absolutely experiment. Mind go well. That's all.
Claire, you had something to say?
Oh, just a quick reminder to anybody who's listening that being non-binary or being trans doesn't necessarily mean a medical transition too. So there are plenty of people out there who don't get any surgeries and don't take any hormones and are still trans and are still non-binary. So there's lots of ways to do stuff. So that's all.
Beautiful. All right. Sleight is working on reconnecting. In the meantime, we're going to start taking a couple of questions. We're probably not going to have time to get to everything because our lovely captioner is also in England, so is probably feeling very sleepy right now. So we will start with a question from me, and it's a bit of a classic question. If you had unlimited funds, time, and all the skills you needed, what costume would you make? Who wants to go first? Claire, you look like you're pretty thrilled.
Well, I mean, who doesn't like that concept, right? Like unlimited time and skill, like, oh yeah. I'm kind of in the process of designing a Slytherin, like Edwardian style outfit right now. I don't know where the heck I'm going with it, but I'm having a really fun time playing with like ridiculous frills and like gender expression in the design process. And I don't know, I don't have like a great source material for it yet. I think something that I know would be really cool is taking like, for example, something that people love, which are the Worth gowns. Like I don't know, I don't feel called to them, but I know a lot of people do, is taking a Worth gown and making it into a suit somehow. Like that would be cool. Like somehow transitioning that into a men's wear would be pretty rad.
Looks like we are regaining Sleight.
For example,
yay, they're back. Hooray.
In
All
2 seconds. All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. My internet gave out entirely on me. So
that's
awesome.
fair. So just to catch you up, we're on the first question of the Q&A list, the dream costume question. Who wanted to go next? B?
I think right now I'm working on one of my dream costumes, actually. I don't know if I actually have the money to do it, but I'm gonna figure it out, which is like a Lady Dorian Gray from the 1890s when Picture of Dorian Gray was written. I really love Oscar Wilde. He's on me forever. But I also pretty stereotypical, but I would love to make like a Jo March, but not the new one, a Jo March costume, because she's always come across as very queer and possibly non-binary to me, the way that she is written and plays with clothing and gender. And I've always really loved her and related to her, and I would love to make like all of her clothes.
Yeah. Rosen.
For the longest time, my dream cosplay would actually be Master Chief from Halo, but I would want it colored in light teal because Tucker is my favorite character from the Red versus Blue web series, which is actually where the quote on my shirt comes from. So that would be my dream cosplay someday. Someday I'll get there.
Sleight or Rose? Not Rose.
So
Sleight or Lee?
I have a couple. So my next big competition, which I would not say is my dream cosplay, is I have a couple from Final Fantasy XIV, which, if you know the Final Fantasy series, is extremely elaborate. But my dream cosplay that I want to get to the skills where I could make it is Griffiths from Berserk. Like full suit of armor, wings, like all armor work. That's full plate mail. I am not yet to the point where I can make full plate mail, but it's my dream to get there. So in the meantime, I'm just suffering Final Fantasy cosplays.
Very nice. All right, Lee, what about you?
I'll say two of them because I think as costumers we're always like ooh, you know. But one would be a full French court dress from mid 18th century. So I keep going back and forth between 1760s and 1770s. They're like very different silhouettes, but very similar themes in a lot of ways, I guess. And another one would be to do like Utena, but as a regency, like a full regency military, but Utena. I don't know how I'd manage the hair, but just giving that really over the top kind of romantic feel to that, I think would be really awesome.
Military jackets are my jam, so I want to see that when you make that.
I like how optimistic you are. You said when.
Exactly. Factor. Nudge.
All right, we had a great question from your sewing buddy. What have been your experiences with gatekeeping, either in the costuming world or in the LGBTQIA+ community? Who wants to go first? Rosen?
I had a teacher who's bisexual, and he definitely would not personally gatekeep me, but all of his students. If you're a male in his class and you're straight, he didn't know what to do with you. He was like lost by this concept or something. It was really bizarre. And then if you're female, oh, you're making women's clothing, you're straight. He didn't really, for being by himself, he couldn't understand other people. It was very, very bizarre. And because of that, unfortunately, he is an older gentleman, so he uses a lot of very archaic terms and kept things extremely binary, even though he himself didn't quite fit the mold. So not just me, but a lot of students would actually come to me because they could tell that I was a lot more open. And I'd actually talk to them like they're humans. You don't have to fit into these super tiny boxes. So it was very stressful, and I'm very glad to be done with that class series.
Yeah. Anyone else got some examples?
I haven't had it with costuming. The inclusivity of the costuming and cosplay community is why I am in it and love it as much as I do. However, in the LGBT community, I'm asexual, and that's something that's can be really awkward. Oh, I see my representation buddies. But it can be really awkward in a lot of gay LGBT spaces because there gets to be such a fixation on a lot of the sexual identities that don't include asexuality often. And it's nothing like, it's not purposely like against asexuals usually. But I remember when I was at a fundraiser for a gay men's chorus, and this was really cool. They were going through the crowd, they had a little iPad, and they were polling everybody on what their like gender and sexuality was. And they get to me and I say asexual / demisexual, and they're like, and they didn't have it. It wasn't even an option. And I had a nice chat with the guy, be like, yeah, like, especially when the whole idea of that is this is an event for inclusivity, include us.
Lots of
we exist. We're still part of it. So sometimes I feel like the odd man out in a lot of LGBT events because of that.
lots of ace buddies sounding off in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People.
I'm also demisexual, and I feel like demisexual specifically, people just will straight up tell you to your face that's not real. And I've had friends that I'm not friends with anymore say, stop trying to be special. Demisexuality isn't real. You just like to wait. And anything like that. And so going from being demi and a very feminine AFAB non-binary person, people just kind of like put me to the sidelines. And I feel like most non-binary and like demi and ace people really can relate to that.
Yep, they just brush you off. Actually, that hits on a really good point. It's much better now, but I remember like 10 years ago, it was a lot harder to come out and explain to people if you were non-binary. And even a lot of the trans community be like, oh, but you're one or the other, right? Like you're one or the other. And now it's much better. But I remember back when I was still like figuring things out, like it was a lot harder to be non-binary and be respected and not have people like question you. I'm glad we're getting better.
I still think we have a problem with, oh, you're not trans enough.
Yes.
There are often people who never wish to have any sort of surgery or hormone, or non-binary people, and people will go, oh, well, you're not really trans enough. And it's like, it's not your that's not your like realm to say no. Same with a lot of people like who have non-binary sexualities, where so often it's like, oh, well, you're not gay enough. Like, what are you doing here? Or the same with as you two mentioned, like asexual identities. Well, it's like, well, you're straight, right? And it's like, oh, no.
You're kind of special.
You know, so I think sometimes there's this like need to kind of, for some people to just be like, oh, if you're not the extreme of something, then you don't count. And it's like, well, there's such a rich experience of being one identity or another. You can't really say, well, you can't be it because I don't think you're it. And it's like, it's ignoring that person's lived experience. Like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. No, they live all day like that. I think I trust them. But to echo though, I think the costuming community has been a lot more inclusive. I only really see the issues come up with like sometimes when you do want to play a little bit with the idea of historical accuracy and gender, sometimes you might want to add something in that's perhaps deemed feminine on your masculine outfit, and occasionally you'll get those people that are like, that's not historical enough. And you're like, no, that's not the point of this. Also, it's more true to what this person is seeing in it. You don't need to then gatekeep and say, you can't be part of our event because it's not like fully historically accurate. I think there is sometimes that sort of thing where that will happen, but usually a lot of people have just been like, come on in, water's fine.
Yes. All right. I think we're going to have to wrap it up here, unfortunately. It's been an amazing panel. You guys have been so informative. I know that I have just consumed so much information. It's wonderful. I highly suggest anyone who's watching who has more questions and things, please put them in the comments of this video, and we will, as a group, get to as many of them as we can over the next few days. Thank you so much to our wonderful captioner who has, I imagine, her keyboard is on fire right now. So huge thanks to that. And of course, an amazing thank you to our panelists. You have all brought just wonderful, interesting thoughts and perspectives. Thank you all so much for doing this. And of course, I'll be passing everyone's thanks on to Henric as well when they wake back up. And yes, so I will say very loudly that trans people are people, non-binary people are people, trans and non-binary rights, obviously. So I feel like it's important for me to say that, but you all have just been fantastic. Thank you all for giving your time to this. And thank you everyone in the chat who has just been so wonderful. I haven't had to hit the ban button once. All right.
Thank you
First.
to you, Eilish, for hosting us. So thank you very much for the host.
Yeah.
You're
Yes, thank you very
Inclusivity.
much.
Like, thank you so much for giving us your platform.
Well, so as I said at the start, everyone's social details are in the description. Please go follow these incredible people. And as they said, reach out to them. No one's alone. We all want to share and look out for each other. If you think that you're going through something alone, you're not. Someone is there who knows, who cares. So reach out.
Also, if anyone knows a really good way to convert something from a corseted pattern to a non-corseted pattern,
hit me up there. All right. Thank you everyone so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of CoCoVid. Goodbye.
Bye.